Welcome everybody to Lyme disease ecology and patient health. Thank you so much for coming in. My name is Jen Wyman. I'm an adult services librarian here with Caroline, and we're very glad you're here. Other than that, I need to introduce our speakers. We are waiting on Dr. Lynn Durand to get here. He's a longtime family physician in the Concord area who's now retired and is focused on Lyme disease, other tick-borne diseases, long COVID. So he's able to focus on what he wants to focus on now. He will be with us shortly. And right now we have Miss Kathie Fife here with us, a Lyme and tick-borne disease ecologist and patient advocate living with late-stage vector-borne illness of Lyme disease. Her challenging health experiences have motivated her to delve into extensive research to help others suffering from the disease, including writing a bill and testifying at the State House. In 2019, her Lyme disease testing bill was signed into law by Governor Chris Sununu. She's here to share her knowledge and experience and encourage everyone to advocate and empower themselves with knowledge and to understand the important connection between wildlife and land use management, essential predators, plants, and wildlife behavior for human and ecosystem health. So please welcome Kathie.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming, and thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate it, and thanks for inviting me to be here as a speaker. Like I said, Dr. Durand will be here shortly, so I will start the presentation. Okay, so these are the ticks that are found in New Hampshire. The most common one is the black-legged tick, also called the deer tick, the dog tick, and the Lone Star tick. Has anybody seen a Lone Star tick in New Hampshire? It's not as common as the other two. The population is mostly along the southern border of Massachusetts and along the seacoast. They've been documented here for a couple decades, but Maine has a higher population of Lone Star ticks. And these are the, right here, this is the pathogens that it carries, but I'm not going to talk too much about that tonight because we don't see a lot of the Lone Star ticks. I'm mostly going to focus on black-legged ticks tonight. However, you probably over the years have heard, oh, it's a dog tick, don't worry about it. That's not true. Because these are the pathogens that are inside the dog ticks are carrying. And before, it's not very common. You're not going to run into it very often in New Hampshire, but it does happen, especially in the southern part of the state. So it's good to be aware and to treat dog ticks exactly as you would black-legged ticks to be on the safe side.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
The little below the large photo of the ticks, there's two smaller.
Yep, these are the larva and the nymph.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. You can see they're so tiny. They're hard to see. Okay, so if we are thinking about how did Lyme disease and how did ticks get so bad in the Northeast over the years, if we go back and we look at our natural history back over about 250 years, the original forests were old growth. They had a nice wide biodiversity of species, especially predators, which preyed on animals such as deer, which carry a lot of the black-legged ticks that fall off from them. So the other thing I mentioned earlier is that I was misdiagnosed for 35 years, and so as a consequence, I'm a lot better because of Dr. Durand treated me. He finally figured out what was wrong with me and treated me. But I do have neurological issues, which is brain fog, and my brain and my mouth don't always come together as fast as I want them to. So if at any point you're like, I don't understand what you meant, can you clarify that? Or do not hesitate, because I am here to help you. It's all in here. I just sometimes have a hard time getting it out. So do not hesitate to ask and to clarify. Okay, so going back to, if we look at the history, we had a nice wide biodiversity of species of plants and animals, and that helps to keep the landscape healthy and also helps to keep humans healthy. And over the course of the years, as the Europeans settled here, we clear-cut the land, so we went from this nice biodiversity of here all the way down to here, where it's almost completely clear-cut. And in doing that, they killed off many species of animals, including beaver, deer, turkeys, mountain lions, wolves. And during that time, there was an extinction of one particular species. Does anybody know what this is? This bird? That's right. Have you heard how important the passenger pigeon is too? Okay, we'll talk about that. So the passenger pigeon lived in colonies of millions of birds, and they would saturate in the sky, and there was stories of it looked like a solar eclipse, or the sky would just be so black there were so many birds. And that's how they survived in large colonies like that. And they would land in trees, and they would be so heavy in the trees that some of the limbs would drop and fall and cause a light to fall into the, like if a tree fell down, you'd have this bare space, which would bring the light in, which allows other species to start to grow underneath it. So, and also they would have dozens of nests in one single tree. So, and then of course, there's a lot of guano with that. So they're dropping a lot of guano. And it could be up to 6 inches thick underneath the tree. And it would kill everything on the base of the tree. Any vegetation that was growing on the base of the tree. And this was, and as the birds left and migrated, that guano would break down and it would become one of the most fertile compost. And so it actually helped to grow, to support more species of plants to grow underneath it. So this is what the landscape looked like when they were in the 1800s. These are roads. And as they completely, these are all logs going down a river. And then here, and these two, they had stripped it so heavily of vegetation and trees that all this sediment, if we had a strong storm come in, it would just wash away. So all the nutrients in the soil would wash away. So during the colonial times, as you can see, all the trees had been cut, and they used the stumps as fences. And as the stumps began to break down, they didn't have any more trees to cut. So that's when they started using stone walls, starting building stone walls. They used the stones, used those to keep their sheep in. But because they had completely stripped the land of trees and they had killed off almost all the animals, there was nothing to keep the soil nutrient, nourished. And so they had completely depleted all loss of organic matter, and they ended up moving out west because they just couldn't grow anything. So this is what the landscape looks like today. This is a lot of what we see in New England. And so these stone walls are still here, reminding us of that time. And then we have these edges here. And we love to build our houses right in the middle. And so this is perfect tick habitat. Because what we have here is we have animals, and we have seeds, and we have acorns, so that you have exchange of animals coming and going and dropping seeds, dropping the plants are dropping seeds, and the animals are coming and feeding, and so and then the mice love this because this is the perfect habitat. You have humidity, and you have protection from all this growth here. Well, they also love to go inside the stone walls, and it's a perfect habitat for them because they're protected from predators. So the white-footed mouse, as we know, I'll get into this a little bit more, is the reservoir for the tick-borne diseases. And so they have found that if they live inside the crevices within the stone walls, they're well protected. So they can come out, feed on acorns and other seeds, and go back in and be protected by the stone wall. And this is a great example of the diversity of animals that use the stone walls. The traveling corridors.
No, it's our video.
Can you turn off the volume?
Can you see okay? Yeah. You can see the mouse. The eastern chipmunk is also a reservoir for vector-borne diseases. Still trying. But as you can imagine, if you think of, if you walk through the forest, or there's it's like stone walls are like the veins going through, and all this is perfect habitat for mice. So on the news we hear a lot, well, climate change is causing all the tick-borne diseases and the ticks to get worse, and that is true, but it's not the only factor. We have warmer winters, less snow most of the time. Sometimes we have a lot of snow, which is good. And then we also have storm damage. And so when these strong storms come through, they create a pocket in the canopy of the forest, which is perfect because it creates new growth, which mice love. And so it creates the perfect habitat for mice. The other thing is ticks love humidity and warmth. So they survive perfectly when there's, like this spring, when we had so much rain. Have you ever seen the movie Gremlins? Whatever you do, don't water them. That's all I could think of this spring. So the ticks were really bad this spring. I don't know if in my area, were they down here too? Did they have bad ticks? Yeah. So when we have drought season, there's a perception that, well, they're dying. Well, not particularly. Some will, but they will bury down into the leaf litter, and they'll stay moist down there until we get more rain, and then they'll come back, or if they find a warm body to latch onto. So one of the issues that we have with invasive species is this, are you familiar with barberry? This was a very common landscape plant for many, many years. It's now illegal to sell it in New Hampshire because of its invasive nature. The birds love the seeds. They go into the forest, especially where there's been fragmented forests or disturbance in the soil. They deposit the seeds through their scat, and then you have these plants growing up through the forest that are not native. They have no nutritional value for native wildlife other than birds that like the seeds. And this plant particularly has thorns, and it creates its own humidity. So if we're in a drought and you have many of these plants growing in the forest, the ticks and the mice are very, very happy, which is this perfect combination of this microclimate for tick-borne diseases. So unfragmented lands, which means any lands that are not disturbed, that have a high biodiversity, supports a higher diversity of native species and lowers the risk of pathogens transmitted to humans. So I was out for a walk, this is just a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed, our forests have changed so much. We've lost chestnuts, like the black walnuts and the butternuts, which are high value trees. We don't have many of those anymore because of the diseases. Elms, even though that's not a high quality wood per se, every loss of biodiversity of species increases infections. So today, as a result of the loss of the passenger pigeon, they would come down and they would consume thousands of acorns. And at the time, the white oak was the most dominant species in the southern part of New Hampshire and throughout the Northeast. And with their loss, the red oak has expanded, and you don't find as much white oak as you used to. Also, white oak is a much more valuable timber species for the quality of wood, like whiskey barrels and flooring and so forth, and it has a much tighter grain, so the value of it is, forest landowners are looking for white oak. Well, you don't find as much as that, much as white oak now as you do, but we have red oak, which is taking over, which also has more diseases that are being introduced right now, which red oak is now in the process of becoming almost like white ash has. Excuse me. However, this type of management is perfect for ticks and Lyme disease. These are all red oak trees. Everything was cut here. There's no biodiversity. It's one single tree. So, and then they have they've scoured the soil. That's for acorns to grow rapidly. So what loves to browse on red oak is deer. So as this begins to mature in a year, this is all going to be red oak, and it's going to be perfect for deer to come in and to browse on that, and it's also perfect for mice. And this one, this is a stone wall. So this is perfect here because you've got the mice in here coming out, getting the acorns, going back, and this here is the trail. As this begins to grow up, I can guarantee within a year, between 1 and 10 years, that the ticks in here are going to be unreal.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So have we always had ticks, but now that we're doing more clearing,
Exactly.
they're multiplying?
It's a combination. It's a combination. We have, because we have over the years, we have less predators that prey on rodents, which are the reservoir for tick-borne diseases, and also the fragmented landscape. Let me go to the next slide. I'll go back to the other one. So this is just an example here, but the Carey Institute in New York, they have a excellent program where they study Lyme and tick-borne diseases. And in that study, they said forest patches smaller than 3 acres had an average of 3 times as many ticks as larger forest patches, and as many as 80% of the ticks in the smallest patches were infected with Lyme. So researchers suggest that community planners should avoid creating forest fragments smaller than 5 acres. So this is Laconia. This is not the study site, but I thought this was an excellent example because right here you have these really tiny patches of trees, and some of them are oaks, which, you know, you have loss of biodiversity. You don't have a lot of movement going through there. But at night, you know, these wildlife come through and they're scavenging for, you know, they're going through the dump, they're whatever we leave outside. Well, one of the things that is really driving that is we all love to feed birds. I mean, I admit it, I enjoy it, I love it, I find it very relaxing. But the thing is, if you have so much accumulated, the mice are coming out at night and feeding on it. And when you're in these, if you don't have predators coming to feed, you know, to prey on the mice, you run into problems with them getting into the house and, you know, get the wires under your car. So what happens is people start putting out these bait boxes, which is rodenticides, to kill the mice. Well, unfortunately, what happens is it kills the mice, but also we have these, what I like to call healthcare workers of the forest, are coming in looking to prey on these mice, and they're finding the dead mice, and they're being affected and becoming either very sick or dying from eating the mice that are. So it's a vicious cycle. In New Hampshire, in Vermont, the fisher they have found that the fisher is the most impacted, along with hawks and owls. And it goes up the food chain, including our pets. And I wish we had mountain lions and wolves here because that would help with the deer herd, but we don't. And so it just accumulates through the food chain. So bobcats and fishers are the most impacted right now.
What about rabbits?
Rabbits? Well, you know, rabbits, they are carriers of tularemia, which is it's just starting to emerge in pockets. So your question, rabbits? Yes. So that is the CDC and Department of Defense has called tularemia, I can never say it, tularemia, a biological weapon. Does it mean it's happening? No. Can it happen? Yes, because there's many ways that it can be spread, and one of them is through ticks. Okay. And rabbits are a carrier.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah, but it can also be airborne and in the water. So it's not just ticks, but it's, if you go to the CDC website, I used to have a slide, it shows you it's considered a biological weapon. It could, but has it happened? No. Is it gonna happen? I hope not. Just to reiterate a little bit on the value of, this is a coyote that I saw. This poor thing, it was in, I think March, and I can't say for certain because I didn't, you know, nobody has evaluated it, but it looks like it has mange because it has lost all its hair. And this is a result of eating mice that have died from rodenticides. So this is what happens to coyotes and foxes and other animals when they eat too many. And all he's trying to do right here is just find the mice in this old abandoned orchard. He's doing his ecological job here. So if you see an animal with mange, it's most likely from rodenticides. And people say, oh, it's overpopulation. Because their immune system is strong enough, they can fight off mange. But once their immune system has been compromised, then they get mange. And that's because of rodenticides.
Mange affect the bear?
It can affect almost anything, really. But mostly see it in foxes and coyotes and, yeah, mostly foxes.
We had a bear in our neighborhood this spring. Many people saw it frequently and identified that the coat on his rump was very thin and whereas vigorous the rest of the body. stood out.
Well, could be a number of things. Yeah. So when we think about, the CDC estimates there's 500,000 new cases of Lyme disease per year. But if you look at this map, what do you see? What's that?
New England area.
Yeah. Do you see anything particularly stick out?
Massachusetts looks like they're
Yeah.
doing real well.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, and that is a result of changing the way they document Lyme disease. So we don't really know how many people have Lyme disease, but it's estimated 500,000 new cases per year. So are deer the leading cause of Lyme? Well, it used to think that because they dropped so many ticks, that they were infecting everybody because of they have Lyme. And this is the scenario that we have been, that oaks and acorns, if it's a good mast year of acorns, then we're going to see a rise in Lyme disease. And if the acorns don't drop a lot, we're going to see a drop in Lyme disease. But we haven't really seen that, have we? No, it hasn't really happened that way. And the interesting thing is that what used to be called the gypsy moth is now called the, my brain just went.
I didn't know it got renamed.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, yeah.
spongy moth.
Yeah.
So the mice, which are the vectors for these pathogens, are feeding on the acorns, and the deer are coming and feeding and dropping the ticks into the forest floor, and the mice are picking them up, and it's just this. You have this cycle going on. The interesting thing here is that the gypsy moth or the spongy moth caterpillar, the mice will feed on the pupae, but they don't feed on all stages of the spongy moth. However, the shrew does, and the shrew will cache the parts of the spongy moth throughout the winter and feed on it, which is also a vector for tick-borne diseases. So now they're starting to look at the shrew as if, the theory was that if there wasn't enough acorns, that the mouse population would drop and then Lyme disease would drop, but it hasn't happened. And so right now they're looking at the shrew as being possible. One of the reasons why it's not, we're still, the numbers are still increasing. There's a theory that people think that, well, because we don't have wolves, the coyote has come, the eastern coyote, which has some wolf DNA in it, is decimating the deer population, but that's just not true. Because if they were, they're not doing a very good job. I wish they were, because we really need to thin the herd. So when we think about biodiversity of species, and we think about what animals are passing pathogens and how are we getting sick and so forth. So the more biodiversity of species, and obviously this includes plants, but ticks don't feed on plants, so I didn't put them in here, but plants are extremely valuable to biodiversity because they feed the animals and so the animals here on the blue side are very unlikely, almost not at all, to be reservoirs for passing on pathogens. When a tick latches on, which is in particular the black-legged tick, when it latches on for a blood meal of any of these species, it's highly unlikely it's going to transfer pathogens to the next host. However, over here we have mice, shrews, chipmunks, and birds. Look at this one. This is a harbinger of spring. This is what we love to see we love to see. But yeah, the robin is a reservoir for tick-borne diseases. And it's in our lawn, eating. And the reason why the robin has become a reservoir is our fault, is humans. Remember Rachel Carson and DDT? Well, we didn't learn very much because we're still doing it. We have poisoned and weaken the immune system of the robins so much that now they are reservoirs for tick-borne diseases. So let's look at the different Lyme, the different pathogens. And I'm going to focus just on black-legged ticks because that's the most common. And I'm happy, and Dr. Durand is happy to answer questions if you have questions about Rocky Mountain spotted fever. But it's so rare that I'm not going to spend time on it, but we're happy to answer the questions. So when we think of Lyme, there's over 100 species of different species of Lyme all around the world. In New England, we focus on Borrelia burgdorferi, which is a bacteria. And again, the white-tailed deer is not a reservoir. So if the tick takes a blood meal at any stage of its life cycle from a white-tailed deer, it will not, the deer will have antibodies, but it will not pass the pathogen to the next cycle. However, that study was done the white-tailed deer serum, which is the blood, kills the Lyme disease spirochete, Borrelia burgdorferi. This was done in vitro. Does anybody know what in vitro means? Yes?
In a laboratory situation?
Right, in a sterile, controlled environment. So if you see this and they say, oh, well, we need to have white-tailed deer because they kill the Lyme bacteria. That has not been proven in vivo, which means in real life. So it's a great study. I hope we can get somewhere with that. I hope it helps with science. But if you hear that, just know that it's not, it hasn't really been proven. And so there's another Lyme-like, which is called Borrelia miyamotoi. And that is fairly new. How long has it been here, Dr. Durand? About 20 years that we've
been talking about it for 10 or so.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe 20.
Yeah. It's a species that came from Japan. How it got here, who knows? We have the animal trade, we have people moving, we have people bringing their dogs and cats, and who knows? The thing is that the white-tailed deer is actually a reservoir for miyamotoi. Their serum does not kill the Borrelia miyamotoi. After an adult tick has taken a full blood meal from a white-tailed deer, and it drops, the tick drops to the forest floor, she lays her eggs, which is usually thousands. The eggs are mostly all infected with Borrelia miyamotoi. And then, so if you go and you get a Lyme disease test, it's not going to pick up this. Right, Dr. Durand? Yeah. And also, it very rarely has a rash. So, but it has all the same similar Lyme-like symptoms. Babesia. Anybody heard of Babesia? No, it's been on the news quite a bit lately. They're saying that, this is it's emerging, it's becoming a problem, but it's been here for a very long time, because I had it 35 years ago. It's just now being documented. So if you hear it on the news that this is emerging, and it's been here. There's nothing new about it. And so it's a parasite, which means it gets into your red blood cells. It's not the same thing as Lyme disease, which is a bacteria. And so if you go and you get your 2 pills of doxycycline, it's not going to hit it. Right? Right, Dr. Durand? Yeah. Okay. So the interesting thing is... I'm sorry?
I don't think it'll get the Lyme either. But
yeah. So the focus is Babesia microti in New Hampshire. There are 3 different species of Babesia in New Hampshire, but the only one that the CDC focuses on and your doctor test focuses on is microti. However, back 1940s, trying to remember, there was extensive study. It was before Lyme disease really became on the radar. and they did a lot of studies of testing ticks, and they found that Babesia odocotyli was the most dominant vector in vector-borne disease in ticks. And they did this study, and they found all along the northeast, white-tailed deer is the reservoir, which can be passed on to the tick egg, just like Borrelia miyamotoi can be. And then all of a sudden, they just stopped talking about it. So why is that? I don't know. It just dropped off the radar. However, Canada has been studying it extensively. And recently they found in Ontario area that Babesia odocotyli was coming up often in their ticks that they were testing, and also they were finding it, people were getting sick from it. So they decided to do from east to west of Canada, and they tested all the ticks, and they found that 10% of the black-legged ticks in Canada are carrying Babesia odocotyli. However, if you go and you get a test of Babesia duncani, and it comes up positive, and you've never visited the West Coast, it's most likely odocotyli because they cross-react. And the other thing is that odocotyli is virulent, which means it's not treatable. So if you've been diagnosed with Babesia and you go through treatment and you have a relapse and then they get treated again and you relapse again, it's possible it's Babesia odocotyli. Anaplasmosis, this is fun, isn't it? This is like a needle in a haystack. There's anaplasmosis phagocytophilum right here, which is what we get tested for when we go to the doctor. However, there are dozens of different species of anaplasmosis, and some animals in some different tick species are vectors and reservoirs, and so it gets very, very confusing, and my head explodes. So, however, dog ticks have started to show some anaplasmosis. What species it is of anaplasmosis, I don't know if it's phagocytophilum or not. I don't know. It's a lot of gray area. This is all new science. So, I always say if you don't feel well, talk to your doctor. And Powassan is a virus. This is fairly new, and this is very serious. Again, these are all our reservoir. So if a tick takes a bite from any of these animals, it has a blood meal, it can pass it on. It's found in pockets, and they don't know why. It doesn't seem to flow through the landscape like Lyme disease and the others. It just seems to be found in pockets. And then the groundhog tick and the squirrel tick are also carriers. However, these two ticks very rarely bite humans, which is a good thing. Powassan, if you are healthy, you have a strong immune system, and you're doing well, and you get a tick bite, it's possible you don't even know you have Powassan because your body can clear it. If somebody is immunocompromised or older, or did you see on the news lately the baby that in Massachusetts, a baby, a 6-month-old baby that was on Martha's Vineyard or Cape Cod, I think it was Cape Cod, and they couldn't figure out what it was, and they finally figured out it was Powassan. And so that poor baby, hopefully it will be okay, but it can cause encephalitis. It can be very serious, and it can cause death. The transmission time is up to 15 minutes. So it's very, very serious. However, most of us who are healthy, we never even know we had it. I don't know, Dr. Durand, do you know if it stays in the body or does it clear itself? We don't know. I don't know. There's not enough information on that. So in 2019, the state of New Hampshire did a survey of all the ticks, and they a count of the ticks, and they found that more than 60% of the black-legged ticks were infected with Lyme disease. That's still about the same now. Not much has changed. Again, I just want to emphasize that, you hear on the news that if a tick larvae, if you get bit by a tick larvae, you don't have to worry about it because it's not true, because it's possible these two can be infected. So just keep that in mind. Oh, here we go, tularemia. Tularemia is considered a select agent, which means the federal government considers it a potential biological weapon. All cases must be reported to state and federal agencies. In Minnesota, they had an outbreak recently. But is it biological weapons? Probably not. So the white-footed mouse gets a bad rap, but they are, without mice on the landscape, we would not have forest, we would not have the landscape, we would not be healthy. It sounds counterintuitive, but without mice, we would not have healthy forests. And what they do is they eat seeds, they help spread seeds, and they effective at eating the spongy moss, and also help spread mycorrhizae, fungi, which I wish I had more time to get into because this is so fascinating. Anybody know what mycorrhizae is? When you walk through the forest, you see a mushroom. Well, underneath that mushroom is yards to up to miles of threads of root-like structures from that mushroom. And the mushroom is the fruiting body from that. And what that does is it attaches to the roots of trees and other plants, and it helps the vegetation to take up nutrients. And without them, the trees that's why if you see a fragmented area where there's been a lot of logging, or a road, or a parking lot, anything, those systems have been broken up. So those trees now don't have that network of nutrients going to them. And what happens if we don't have healthy trees? If they're not getting, just like us, if we we had a diet of carrots and Doritos, how are we going to do? We're going to end up with some health problems. Well, if you look around and we see the health problems of our trees, between the ashes, the oaks, without the mycorrhizae, we lose the healthy trees. All right, I'm going to hand this over to. Oh, okay. All right, this is the last thing I'm going to talk. All right. If we look at the infection rate of ticks, it's counterintuitive. Look at this. This is the colder months. We all think that winter time is the safest month. Guess what? It's not. And that is because, for one thing, we have less biodiversity of species. Like we have hawks that migrate; they're not feeding on rodents. We have snakes that are hibernating in a torpor, and so forth. So you have less animals feeding on mice than you do in the summertime, where you have a higher diversity of species preying on mice. So in the wintertime, ticks have. Have you ever heard of the story of wood frogs? How they have antifreeze? Nope. Okay. Well, ticks have an antifreeze, and it's a sugar, and that helps keep them alive in the winter. And the spirochetes, which is the bacteria of Lyme and other pathogens, love that sugar, and they are feeding on that sugar. Well, what happens if we don't have the fuel to stay warm in the winter? What happens? We got to put on another jacket, or we got to move around to warm up. Well, it's the same thing with a tick. So it's underneath the snow, and the spirochetes from the Lyme disease are aggravating that tick because it's losing its energy from eating the antifreeze, and so that tick is starting to move. And so it's looking for a warm body for a blood meal, which is what that spirochete wants, that Lyme bacteria. So that's why if you get a tick bite in the winter, it's higher probability it's infected. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Okay, so, all right, I have a lot more, but I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Durand. So,
I'm Lynn Durand. I'm a doctor in the area. Set up a family practice here with my wife in 1988 in Kentucky, and gradually became interested in chronic fatiguing illnesses, of which there's it's a very interesting group of problems that can cause that. And unfortunately, most doctors are not really interested in it. And then in this area, a very significant portion of the people with chronic fatigue syndrome or chronic fatiguing illnesses actually have Lyme disease. And at that point, there was a there was a family doc in the seacoast who was treating Lyme disease, but he kind of got excommunicated from the area because it's very politically incorrect to treat Lyme disease. And so I found that I felt that I couldn't tell somebody, you know, I think that your condition is due to Lyme disease and there's not a doctor around to treat you. So I sort of started to do it. Originally, I would tell people, I will treat your Lyme disease if you promise not to tell anybody else, because I was trying to stay in the closet about it. But that didn't work for too long. So anyway, I started getting more and more people with Lyme disease, and after a while, it pretty much kind of took over my practice. And I've since retired from the Concord Hospital System and come back and just now have a very small 2-day-a-week, basically tick-borne disease and Lyme disease, as well as a little bit of long COVID only. So, and I work with a organization of physicians called International Lyme and Associated Disease Society, or ILADS, and we're the group of doctors that believe that Lyme disease is a real thing, that it's a problem, that it's very difficult to treat. Lyme disease. I was trying to think of what would be really helpful, to talk about for you guys. One thing I wanted to talk about is the testing and the accuracy of that Lyme disease testing. What to do if you get a deer tick bite, and there's always the talk about the prophylactic doxycycline single dose. We should talk about if you're treated for a tick bite or Lyme disease, like what's the end point, how to decide how long or how much you should be treated. And something that you said reminded me of one other idea. What was it? Co-infection. You talked about co-infections, and the other thing you referred to was the duration of the tick bite. So what about the testing? Because typically what happens is if you have fatigue, muscles hurt, joints hurt, brain fog, feel like I've had the flu for months, and if you do get Lyme disease testing from your doctor, what's the test like? They typically use what's called 2-stage Lyme disease testing. Theoretically, the first stage is supposed to have a high sensitivity but low specificity, so it should pick up everything theoretically about the Lyme disease. And then they follow that. If it's positive, if it's negative, they say, well, that's it. And if it's positive, they follow that with a second stage, which is called the Western blot. It turns out that the sensitivity of that testing is very low, and unfortunately, doctors are not really aware of that. I was just reviewing the other night a study, a meta-analysis of about 30 or so studies that looked at the sensitivity of the Western blot testing. And bottom line, they said that with all these studies, that the average came out to 52%. So if you have a test which has a sensitivity of 52%, in other words, if 100 people came in with actually had Lyme disease, really had Lyme disease, the test would be positive in 52 and negative in 48. But if you don't realize that high false negative rate, then basically what happens is you're told, well, your test is negative, so you can't have it, end of story. So it's very important to recognize, I think, that if you don't feel well and you're tested for Lyme disease, then with the typical Lyme disease testing, a negative test does not mean you don't have it. Duration of tick bite, typically if you go to the doctor and you say, I had a tick bite, and one of the first questions will be, how long was the tick attached for? Because most doctors will say, well, if it used to be that they said 48 to 72 hours, now they will often say 24 to 72 hours. If it wasn't that long, it couldn't have transmitted Lyme disease. Excuse me. And it is true that for the average tick, an average tick bite, it probably does take 24 hours or so for the Lyme to be transmitted. The tick is actually attached for about that long before it can transmit Lyme. That's because the Lyme lives in the tick's midgut in a not activated form. And it doesn't get activated until blood gets, the tick has to bore in and start sucking blood. And what it does is it sucks and spits and sucks and spits. It spits anticoagulants and analgesics and a whole bunch of chemicals. And so it takes a while until your blood starts to get to its midgut. And then the Lyme disease in the midgut gets activated, goes through the tick's bloodstream, gets to the tick's salivary gland, and then as the tick is spit, it starts to spit the Lyme into you. So it does, for the typical tick bite, take a while for the tick to be able to transmit to you Lyme. However, there are several situations where that's not the case. And I've seen people that have gotten Lyme disease from tick bites that have been clearly documented to be around 1 hour or so. And some of those situations are partial feeding. Let's say, for instance, the tick jumped on a dog and started to have a blood meal from the dog, but because of whatever tick and flea collar or whatever that the dog has, it finds the environment to be unsatisfactory and jumps off, and then it needs to complete the blood meal. So then maybe that tick jumped off your dog and now jumps on you, and since it already started its blood meal, it can have the Lyme in its salivary gland right from the get-go. And there's about 5% of ticks actually already have it there anyway, without even the partial feeding. So if you go to the doctor with a tick bite and they say, well, it was only 24 hours, that's not long enough to have given you Lyme disease, so don't worry about it. That's actually not the case, and you need to continue to think about it. What is Lyme disease prophylaxis? The term prophylaxis means prevention. So the thought is that if you have a tick bite, there is some thought that giving one single dose of doxycycline is going to prevent the transmission of Lyme. And I have a few thoughts about that. One is, very many times, I've had patients or heard of people that have gone to the doctor and had a tick bite and symptoms, i.e. a rash that's about 1.5 inches or so. So that's, I'll get to another point later, and that's what Lyme disease rash looks like. But if you already have a rash that's about 1.5 inches or so, or already have fever, flu-like symptoms, you basically already have Lyme disease. And so you can't prevent something you already have. So I have absolutely seen patients that have come into the doctor with Lyme disease and been given just a single dose of doxycycline. How long do you treat for? Right now, most doctors say you treat with doxycycline for 10 to 14, maybe 21 days. My guess is you all know people who have had Lyme, had that duration of treatment or maybe much longer, and then they'll typically say, well, I was getting better. I didn't get all the way better, but it was getting better, and then we stopped the doxycycline, and then the symptoms came back. And my doctor said, well, you've had adequate treatment, so therefore it can't be Lyme, so it must be something else. The end point of treatment for Lyme disease is you feel better, and you feel all the way better, and you stay better after the antibiotics stop. So there's long-term Lyme disease, which is very, very controversial, but really exists, and you can't let yourself be told, well, you've been treated, so you're okay. And usually the response is, you've been treated, you still have symptoms, so it must be in your head. Here's some Prozac. It's amazing how most patients that come in with chronic Lyme disease have been given an antidepressant because they've been told it must be in your head. My worst patient with that was a fourth grader that came in, and she said she didn't want to go to school because she was too tired and her knees hurt too much when she did the stairs, and she refused to go to school. They did whatever workup, couldn't find anything. They said she had school phobia, and she comes in with Prozac in fourth grade. The next year after treatment, she was playing soccer, you know. What other points to make quickly? Co-infections. When you get treated for Lyme disease, these ticks, as Kathie was saying, can carry all sorts of other bacteria that work together as a team. It's so much more difficult to treat Lyme plus one of these other infections. They kind of work together. Lyme works as an immunosuppressant to prevent the body from adequately treating these other infections. Excuse me. So a lot of times somebody is treated for Lyme disease and they continue to have symptoms. Yes, it could be that they have continuation of the Lyme disease, but it could be that one of these other infections wasn't identified and treated. So that's one of the other things to think about.